My dad finally found happiness after years of grief, but his new fiancée was hiding something. She played the perfect woman in front of him and a monster when he wasn't looking. I had to outsmart her before she destroyed our family. I always thought having the world's best dad was a blessing. My father was the kind of man who would drive 3 hours in a snowstorm just to watch me play in a high school basketball game where I spent most of the time on the bench. When I broke my arm trying to impress a girl by skateboarding down the steepest hill in our neighborhood, he didn't lecture me about being reckless. Instead, he took me for ice cream after the hospital visit and helped me figure out how to play video games with one hand. After Mom died when I was 12, it was just the two of us for 6 years. Dad never even went on a date during that time. He said he wanted to focus on raising me properly, making sure I grew up knowing what a good man looked like. I respected him for that choice, even though I sometimes worried he was lonely. So when he finally started seeing someone new during my senior year of high school, I was genuinely happy for him. Her name was Elena, and she worked as a nurse at the local hospital. The first time he mentioned her, his whole face lit up like he was 18 again. She brings me coffee every morning at exactly 7:15, he told me, grinning like a teenager. She remembered I mentioned I hate the hospital vending machine coffee, so she brings me the good stuff from that cafe downtown. For the first month of their relationship, Dad was practically floating. He would come home from work humming old songs, and I caught him looking at himself in the mirror more often, making sure his hair looked good. It was endearing to see him so happy after years of putting everyone else first. Elena seemed perfect from everything Dad told me about her. She volunteered at animal shelters on weekends. She had put herself through nursing school while taking care of her sick grandmother. She loved old movies and could quote every line from The Princess Bride, just like Dad. I was excited to finally meet her, but Elena always seemed to have scheduling conflicts whenever Dad suggested the three of us get together. She was working extra shifts, or her grandmother needed help, or she had already made plans with friends. After 2 months of near misses, I started to wonder if she was avoiding meeting me on purpose. Finally, Dad surprised me by bringing her over for dinner on a Tuesday night without warning. I had just gotten home from my part-time job at the bookstore when I heard unfamiliar laughter coming from the kitchen. "This is my son, Marcus," Dad said proudly, his arm around Elena's waist. "Marcus, this is Elena." She was smaller than I had imagined, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She looked exactly like the type of woman who would volunteer at animal shelters and remember coffee preferences. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Marcus," she said, giving me a warm hug that smelled like lavender and antiseptic. "Your father talks about you constantly. I was starting to think you were avoiding me." We all laughed, and I felt silly for being suspicious. She helped Dad finish cooking dinner, moving around our kitchen like she had been there hundreds of times. She asked thoughtful questions about school and my plans for college, listening to my answers with genuine interest. During dinner, she told funny stories from the hospital that had Dad laughing so hard he nearly choked on his pasta. She complimented the meal even though Dad had clearly overcooked the chicken, and she insisted on helping with the dishes afterward, despite being a guest. As she was leaving, Elena pulled me aside while Dad was getting her coat. "I want you to know how much your father loves you," she said quietly, her hand briefly touching my shoulder. "He's told me how hard it's been since your mother passed, and how proud he is of the young man you've become. I hope you know I would never try to replace her or come between you two." I felt a rush of gratitude toward this woman, who seemed to understand exactly what I needed to hear. After she left, Dad and I cleaned up the rest of the kitchen together. "So what do you think?" he asked, trying to sound casual but clearly anxious for my approval. "I think she's perfect for you, Dad. I meant it completely." Over the next few weeks, Elena became a regular presence in our house. She would come over after her shifts to cook dinner, always making enough for me even when I said I might not be home. She brought me books she thought I would enjoy and remembered details about my life that even some of my friends forgot. The change in Dad was remarkable. He started taking better care of himself, exercising regularly and buying new clothes. He smiled constantly and seemed to have more energy than he had in years. For the first time since Mom died, our house felt like a real home again, instead of just a place where two guys happened to live. But then, small things started to feel off. It began with comments that seemed helpful but left me feeling uncomfortable. Elena pointed out when my room was messy, always with a sweet smile and a tone that made it sound like caring advice. She started reorganizing our kitchen cabinets to be more efficient, moving things around until I could never find anything. When I mentioned being stressed about college applications, she offered to help proofread my essays. The next day, she handed them back with extensive notes written in red ink, pointing out problems with my grammar and suggesting I completely rewrite several paragraphs. "These essays need a lot of work, Marcus," she said gently. "College admissions are so competitive now. You want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward." I spent hours revising based on her suggestions, but something about the feedback felt harsh despite her helpful tone. When I showed the revised versions to my English teacher, she was confused. "These don't sound like you anymore, Marcus. The original drafts had much more personality and voice, but I brushed off the concern. Elena was just trying to help, and she probably knew more about what colleges wanted than my high school teacher did. The real problem started after Dad and Elena had been dating for 4 months. She began spending the night regularly, and I would hear them talking in low voices after they thought I was asleep. Sometimes Elena's voice would rise slightly, though I could never make out the words. One morning, I came downstairs to find Elena making breakfast while Dad sat at the table, looking tired and frustrated. "Good morning, sweetheart," Elena said brightly, but I noticed she was only making eggs for 2 people. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you would be up so early. There's cereal in the pantry if you're hungry." Dad looked up sharply. "Elena, Marcus always eats breakfast with us. You know that." "Of course, silly me." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "I'm still getting used to cooking for 3 people." She cracked another egg into the pan, but I could feel tension in the room that hadn't been there before. Dad kept glancing between Elena and me like he was trying to figure out what was wrong. After Elena left for work, Dad asked if everything was okay. "You seem quiet lately, Marcus. Is school stressing you out?" I wanted to tell him about the strange feeling I got around Elena sometimes, the way she seemed different when he wasn't looking directly at her. But I couldn't put my finger on anything specific, and Dad looked happier than he had in years. "I'm fine, Dad. Just tired." A week later, I came home early from school with a stomach bug and found Elena in my room, going through my desk drawers. She spun around when she heard me, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Marcus, I didn't expect you home so early." She gestured toward my desk. "I was just looking for a pen to write your father a note. I hope you don't mind." But she was holding one of my old journals from middle school, the kind with personal thoughts I had never shared with anyone. The drawer where I kept it was at the bottom of my desk, underneath school supplies and old homework assignments. "That's okay," I said carefully, taking the journal from her hands. "Did you find a pen?" She grabbed a random pen from the top of my desk, the same drawer she claimed to have been searching through. "Oh yes, here's one. Thank you, sweetheart." After she left, I checked my room carefully. Nothing was missing, but several things were in slightly different positions than I remembered. My laptop had been moved, and some papers in my backpack were shuffled around. I started keeping my bedroom door locked after that. The next incident happened 2 weeks later during a family dinner Elena had insisted on preparing. She made my favorite meal, chicken and dumplings, and seemed to be in an especially good mood. But when Dad got up to answer the phone during dessert, her demeanor changed completely. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said quietly, her voice losing all its usual warmth. "I know you don't like me." "That's not true," I protested, but she held up a hand to stop me. "Please don't lie. I can see it in the way you look at me, the way you find excuses to leave the room when I'm here. Your father doesn't notice because he doesn't want to see it, but I do." I was stunned by the sudden shift in her personality. This wasn't the gentle, caring woman who had been dating my dad for months. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said carefully. "I don't have any problem with you." Elena smiled, but it was nothing like the warm smiles she usually gave. This one was cold and calculating. "Here's what's going to happen, Marcus. You're going to stop trying to sabotage our relationship. You're going to be supportive and enthusiastic about your father's happiness, and if you can't do that naturally, you're going to fake it convincingly." "I'm not trying to sabotage anything," I said, my heart racing. "I want Dad to be happy. Do you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you want to keep him all to yourself. Just the 2 of you in your sad little bubble." The cruelty in her voice was shocking. This was a completely different person from the woman who had hugged me and talked about not replacing my mother. "That's not true," I said, but my voice came out shaky. Elena leaned forward, her eyes never leaving mine. "Your father has been alone for 6 years because of you. He put his entire life on hold to make sure you didn't feel abandoned after Mommy died. Don't you think he deserves some happiness now?" Before I could respond, we heard Dad's footsteps coming back down the hall. Elena's face transformed instantly, the cold mask replaced by her usual gentle expression. "Everything okay in here?" Dad asked, settling back into his chair. "Perfect," Elena said sweetly, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Marcus and I were just having a nice chat about how much we enjoy these family dinners together." I stared at her in disbelief, but she just smiled and started clearing the dessert plates like nothing had happened. That night, I lay awake trying to process what had occurred. Part of me wondered if I had imagined the whole thing, if the stress of senior year was making me paranoid. But I couldn't shake the memory of how different Elena had looked when she dropped her mask, how her voice had turned sharp and manipulative. I decided to pay closer attention to Elena's behavior when Dad wasn't around. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Dad had to work late the next Friday, and Elena arrived for dinner before he got home. I was in the kitchen heating up leftover pizza when she walked in without knocking. "Where's your father?" she asked, looking around the kitchen with disapproval. "Still at work. He should be home in about an hour." Elena nodded, then walked over to the refrigerator and started moving things around, reorganizing the shelves without asking. "This is a disaster," she muttered. "How do you two live like this?" "We live fine," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Dad and I have a good life together." Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A good life? Your father is 43 years old and he acts like a college student. He eats pizza for dinner and watches cartoons with his teenage son instead of building an adult relationship with a woman who could actually contribute something to his life." The attack on Dad made my protective instincts flare up. "Don't talk about my father like that." "I'll talk about him however I want," she snapped. "He's my boyfriend, not yours. And whether you like it or not, I'm going to be part of his life from now on. The question is whether you're going to make that easy or difficult." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Because I promise you, Marcus, if you try to come between us, you will lose. Your father wants a real relationship with a grown woman, not a codependent friendship with his son who can't let go of mommy." The mention of my mother felt like a physical blow. I had never told Elena anything about my grief or how close Dad and I had become after Mom died. She was using my deepest vulnerabilities as weapons. Before I could respond, we heard Dad's car in the driveway. Elena's face shifted again, the warm smile returning like she was flipping a switch. "That must be your father," she said in her normal, gentle voice. "Should we set the table for dinner?" By the time Dad walked through the door, Elena was humming cheerfully while arranging napkins, and I was standing frozen by the counter, trying to process what had just happened. "How are my two favorite people?" Dad asked, kissing Elena on the cheek and ruffling my hair. "Perfect," Elena said, beaming at him. "Marcus and I were just talking about how nice it is to have these quiet family moments together." I managed to nod and smile, but inside I felt sick. Watching Elena manipulate Dad so effortlessly was disturbing, but I didn't know how to explain what was happening without sounding paranoid or jealous. Over the next month, Elena's behavior toward me became increasingly hostile whenever Dad wasn't around. She would make cutting comments about my appearance, my grades, and my plans for college. She started changing things around the house without asking, rearranging furniture and throwing away items that belonged to me and Dad. When I tried to talk to Dad about some of the changes, he brushed off my concerns. "Elena is just trying to help us get organized, Marcus. She has good ideas about how to make the house more functional." "But she threw away Mom's recipe box," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. Dad looked surprised. "I'm sure that was an accident. Elena would never throw away something that important." "Did you ask her about it?" I had asked Elena about it, and she had claimed not to know what I was talking about. She suggested that maybe I had misplaced it, or that Dad had moved it somewhere and forgotten. The worst part was watching how Elena acted around Dad compared to how she treated me. With him, she was affectionate, supportive, and interested in everything he had to say. She would bring him thoughtful gifts and remember details about his work that even I sometimes forgot. But the moment Dad left the room, her entire personality would shift. She would make snide comments about my intelligence, my appearance, or my relationship with Dad. She started monitoring my activities, asking intrusive questions about where I was going and who I was spending time with. When I tried to maintain boundaries, she would accuse me of being disrespectful and ungrateful. "Your father has bent over backward to accommodate your needs for years," she would say. "The least you can do is show some appreciation for the woman who makes him happy." The manipulation was sophisticated and effective. Elena was careful never to cross lines when Dad might notice, and she framed all of her criticism as concern for my well-being or Dad's happiness. She also began planting seeds of doubt about my behavior in Dad's mind. "I'm a little worried about Marcus," she would say during dinner. "He seems so stressed about college applications. Maybe he's putting too much pressure on himself." Or she would make comments like, "Marcus seemed upset when I suggested he clean his room yesterday. I hope I didn't overstep. I just want to help him develop good habits before he goes away to school." These comments were technically true, but they left out the context of her hostile tone and invasive behavior. Dad would look at me with concern, wondering why I was being difficult with Elena when she was only trying to help. The breaking point came during spring break of my senior year. Dad had planned a week-long camping trip, just the two of us, continuing a tradition we had maintained since Mom died. But a few days before we were supposed to leave, Elena announced that she had booked a romantic weekend getaway for her and Dad instead. I found out when I came home from school and saw Dad packing a suitcase in his bedroom. "Are we leaving for the camping trip early?" I asked, confused by the timing. Dad looked uncomfortable. "Actually, Marcus, there's been a change of plans. Elena surprised me with a reservation at this beautiful bed and breakfast upstate. We're going to spend the weekend there instead." "What about our camping trip?" "We can do that another time, son." This was really thoughtful of Elena, and she's been working so many extra shifts lately. She deserves a nice vacation. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. This camping trip was one of the most important traditions Dad and I shared, a yearly opportunity to disconnect from everything and just enjoy each other's company. But Elena had deliberately planned something that excluded me, knowing it would force Dad to choose between us. I tried to hide my disappointment, but Dad must have seen it on my face. "We'll reschedule the camping trip, Marcus, I promise." But we both knew it wouldn't be the same. Senior year was almost over, and I would be leaving for college in a few months. This might have been our last chance for one of our solo trips. That weekend, while Dad and Elena were at their romantic getaway, I decided to do some research. Elena's behavior had been escalating, and I was starting to suspect there might be more to her story than Dad knew. I started by searching her name online, looking through social media profiles and public records. What I found was disturbing. Elena had a pattern of dating older men who had recently lost their wives or gone through difficult divorces. In each case, she would present herself as a caring, supportive partner who understood their pain and wanted to help them heal. But according to several forum posts I found, Elena's relationships typically followed a similar trajectory. She would isolate her boyfriends from their friends and family members, particularly any children from previous relationships. She would gradually take control of household decisions and finances, positioning herself as indispensable while undermining other important relationships in her partner's life. One post, written by a woman whose father had dated Elena 2 years earlier, described almost exactly what I was experiencing. Elena had systematically turned the father against his daughter, convincing him that his adult child was selfish and manipulative for not embracing their relationship. The daughter had tried to warn her father, but Elena had been clever about her manipulation, always appearing reasonable and caring in front of him while being cruel when they were alone. Eventually, the father had chosen Elena over his daughter, and they had been estranged for over a year before Elena moved on to someone new. Reading that post felt like looking into a crystal ball of my own future. I could see exactly where Elena's manipulation was leading, and I realized I had to act quickly before she succeeded in driving a permanent wedge between me and Dad. I screenshot everything I could find and compiled it into a folder on my laptop. Then I spent the rest of the weekend figuring out how to approach Dad with this information. When Dad and Elena returned from their trip, both of them were glowing with happiness. Elena was wearing a ring I had never seen before, and Dad could barely contain his excitement. "We have some news to share," Dad announced during dinner. "Elena and I are engaged." My heart sank, but I forced myself to smile and offer congratulations. Elena beamed and showed off her ring, talking about wedding plans and how excited she was to officially become part of our family. After Elena went home that night, I knew I had to talk to Dad immediately. Waiting any longer might make it impossible to reach him. "Dad," I said, sitting down across from him at the kitchen table, "I need to show you something important." I opened my laptop and pulled up the forum posts and articles I had found. Dad's expression grew increasingly serious as he read through them. "Marcus," he said finally, "I don't understand what you're trying to tell me. I think Elena has done this before, Dad. I think she targets men like you, men who have lost their wives and are vulnerable to someone who seems caring and understanding." Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring at the laptop screen. Then he closed it gently and looked at me with disappointment. "Son, I know this is hard for you. Change is always difficult, especially when it involves someone taking your mother's place in my life." "That's not what this is about," I protested. "This is about Elena's behavior when you're not around. She's not the person you think she is." But Dad was already shaking his head. "Elena warned me this might happen. She said you might try to sabotage our relationship because you're afraid of losing me." "She warned you?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Dad, she's manipulating you. Can't you see that?" "What I see," Dad said, his voice growing firm, "is my son trying to destroy the first real happiness I've found since your mother died. And I'm disappointed in you, Marcus." The words hit me like a physical blow. In 18 years, Dad had never spoken to me with such coldness. Elena had succeeded in turning him against me, and she had done it so skillfully that he thought he was protecting himself rather than abandoning his son. I tried several more times over the next few weeks to reach Dad, but Elena had done her work too well. Every attempt to discuss her behavior was met with accusations that I was being selfish and manipulative. Elena, meanwhile, became increasingly bold in her treatment of me. She would openly contradict me in front of Dad, question my decisions, and make comments about how I needed to learn independence before college. "The wedding is in 2 months," she announced one evening. "We've decided to keep it small and intimate. Just immediate family." "What about Marcus?" Dad asked. "Of course, Marcus is invited," Elena said with a sweet smile. "Although I do think it might be good for him to spend that weekend visiting colleges instead. He's been putting off those campus tours, and it would be such a productive use of his time." The suggestion was presented as concern for my future, but I could see the calculation behind it. Elena wanted me excluded from their wedding, and she was manipulating Dad into thinking it was my own choice. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I couldn't save Dad from Elena's manipulation through conventional means, so I needed evidence that was impossible to deny. I started recording our conversations. Using an app on my phone, I began capturing audio whenever Elena and I were alone together. It took several weeks to gather enough material, but eventually I had hours of recordings that showed Elena's true personality. In these recordings, Elena's voice was cold and calculating. She made threats about isolating Dad from me permanently. She talked about how easy it was to manipulate older men who were lonely and desperate for companionship. She even laughed about how Dad believed everything she told him without question. The most damning recording came when Elena was on the phone with someone I didn't recognize, discussing Dad like he was a target rather than a person she loved. "He's almost ready," she said. "Another few months and I'll have him completely isolated from the kid and any friends who might cause problems. The house is already in both our names, and I've convinced him to make me the beneficiary on his life insurance policy." Listening to that conversation made me physically sick. Elena wasn't just manipulating Dad for emotional control. She was positioning herself to benefit financially from their relationship, potentially at Dad's expense. But I knew that simply playing these recordings for Dad wouldn't be enough. Elena had already convinced him that I was jealous and manipulative. He would probably assume I had edited the audio or hired someone to fake Elena's voice. I needed a different approach. I decided to create a situation where Elena would expose herself in front of Dad, where she wouldn't be able to deny what she had said or claim that I had misunderstood her intentions. The opportunity came 3 weeks before their wedding. Elena had been pressuring Dad to ask me to move out after graduation, claiming it would be healthier for me to live independently and better for their marriage to have privacy. Dad was resistant to the idea, but I could see Elena wearing down his resolve with constant comments about how much easier their lives would be with just the two of them. One evening, when Dad was working late again, Elena came over to continue packing up Mom's belongings, something she had been doing gradually for months without asking Dad's permission. I found her in Dad's bedroom, folding Mom's clothes into donation bags. "What are you doing?" I asked, even though the answer was obvious. Elena didn't bother with her usual sweet facade. "We need to make room for my clothes, Marcus. Your father needs to let go of the past and focus on his future. Those clothes belong to Dad, not you. You can't just throw away Mom's things without asking him." Elena stood up, her eyes flashing with anger. "Your mother is dead, Marcus. It's time for your father to stop living in a shrine to her memory and start building a life with someone who's actually alive." The cruelty of her words took my breath away, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had my phone recording, and I needed her to keep talking. "Dad loved Mom," I said. "Her memory is important to him." "Your father thinks he loved your mother," Elena said with a sneer. "But that's just nostalgia and guilt. What we have is real love, adult love, not the childish fantasy he built up in his head after she died." She moved closer, her voice dropping to the threatening tone I had heard so many times before. "And you, Marcus, are the biggest obstacle to that love. You represent everything that's keeping your father stuck in the past. The sooner you're out of this house, the sooner he can move on completely." "What if I don't want to move out?" I asked, though I had already been accepted to a college 3 hours away. Elena smiled, but it was the coldest expression I had ever seen on a human face. "Then I'll make sure you have no choice. I've already started planting seeds with your father about your behavior, your attitude, your lack of gratitude for everything he's done for you. It won't take much more to convince him that you're taking advantage of his kindness." She leaned against Mom's dresser, looking satisfied with herself. "Your father is a good man, Marcus, but he's also weak and easily manipulated. He wants to believe that everyone has good intentions, which makes him perfect for someone like me. He'll choose me over you because I make him feel needed and desired in a way that you never could." The recording was more than enough, but Elena wasn't finished. "And once we're married, once you're out of the picture, I'll make sure your father understands exactly how much better his life is without the burden of a needy son who never learned to take care of himself." That was when Dad walked in. He had come home early from work and heard voices coming from the bedroom. He stood in the doorway for several seconds, taking in the scene. Elena packing away Mom's clothes, me standing with my phone obviously recording, and the tension crackling between us. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice careful and neutral. Elena's face transformed instantly, tears appearing in her eyes as if someone had flipped a switch. "Oh, Larry," she said, her voice shaking with manufactured emotion. "I'm so sorry. I was just trying to help pack up some of Linda's old clothes for donation, and Marcus got upset with me. I didn't mean to overstep." She gestured toward me like I was a dangerous animal. "He's been recording me, trying to make it seem like I said terrible things. I think he's really struggling with the idea of us getting married." Dad looked at me with disappointment and concern. "Marcus, is that true? Have you been recording Elena?" "Yes," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "And I think you should listen to what she actually said before she knew you were here." I played back the last few minutes of the recording, the part where Elena had called Dad weak and easily manipulated, where she had talked about getting me out of the house and making him forget about Mom entirely. Dad's face went through a series of changes as he listened. Confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning recognition of what he was hearing. Elena tried to interrupt several times, claiming the recording was edited or taken out of context, but Dad held up a hand to silence her. When the recording finished, the room was completely quiet except for the sound of Elena's fake crying. "Larry, you have to understand," Elena began, but Dad cut her off. "I understand perfectly," he said, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. "I understand that I've been a fool." He looked at Elena with disgust. "You've been manipulating me for months, haven't you? Making me doubt my own son, convincing me that he was the problem when it was you all along." Elena's tears disappeared instantly, replaced by the calculating expression I knew so well. "If you choose him over me, you'll regret it," she said, her voice returning to its normal, threatening tone. "You're 43 years old, Larry. How many more chances do you think you'll get at real love?" Dad stepped forward, his body language protective and angry. "Get out of my house," he said quietly. "Take your ring, take your clothes, and get out. If you ever contact me or my son again, I'll file a restraining order." Elena stared at him for a moment, perhaps surprised that her manipulation had finally failed. Then she gathered up her things and headed for the door. "You'll be back," she called over her shoulder. "Men like you always come crawling back when you realize how lonely you really are." After she left, Dad and I stood in the bedroom, surrounded by the boxes of Mom's clothes that Elena had been packing away. Dad looked older than I had ever seen him, worn down by months of psychological manipulation. "I'm sorry, son," he said finally. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. It's not your fault, Dad. She was really good at what she did." "But it is my fault," he insisted. "You're my son. I should have trusted you over someone I'd only known for a few months." We spent the rest of the evening unpacking Mom's clothes and putting them back where they belonged. Dad told me about some of the ways Elena had been manipulating him, things I hadn't even known about. "She was slowly isolating me from my friends," he said, "always finding reasons why we couldn't see them, or suggesting that they didn't really understand our relationship. She was also pushing me to change my will, claiming it would show how committed I was to our future together." I felt sick thinking about how close Elena had come to completely controlling Dad's life. Over the next few weeks, we learned more about Elena's pattern of behavior. Dad's lawyer helped us report her to the hospital where she worked, and it turned out she had been under investigation for inappropriate relationships with patients' family members. We also discovered that Elena had been stealing small items from our house over the months she had been visiting. Things we hadn't noticed were missing. Dad's watch that had belonged to his father, some of Mom's jewelry, even some cash from the emergency fund Dad kept in his desk drawer. But the worst part was learning about the other men Elena had targeted. Dad and I spoke with several of them, and their stories were heartbreakingly similar to ours. Elena had a sophisticated system for finding vulnerable men and exploiting their loneliness and grief. One man had signed over power of attorney to Elena and had to fight in court to regain control of his finances. Dad and I decided to document everything we had learned about Elena and share it with local law enforcement and social services. We wanted to make sure other families wouldn't have to go through what we had experienced. The process of healing our relationship took time. Dad felt guilty about how easily he had been manipulated, and I struggled with anger about the months of emotional abuse I had endured. But we worked through it together, with the help of a family counselor who specialized in cases involving psychological manipulation. Dr. Martinez helped us understand how Elena's tactics had worked and how to rebuild the trust that had been damaged. "She exploited both of your greatest strengths, Doctor," Martinez explained during one of our sessions. "Larry, your kindness and desire to make others happy made you vulnerable to someone who knew how to present herself as needy and grateful. And Marcus, your love for your father made you willing to endure abuse rather than risk damaging his happiness." Understanding the psychology behind Elena's manipulation helped both of us feel less foolish about falling victim to it. We learned that intelligent, caring people are often the most susceptible to this type of emotional abuse because they assume others share their good intentions. 6 months after Elena left our lives, Dad and I took the camping trip we had missed during spring break. We spent a week in the mountains, hiking, fishing, and talking about everything we had been through. "I keep thinking about what she said," Dad told me one evening as we sat around the campfire, "about me being weak and easily manipulated." "You're not weak, Dad. You're trusting and kind. Elena saw those qualities as vulnerabilities to exploit, but they're actually your greatest strengths." Dad smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I had seen from him in months. "When did you get so wise?" he asked. "I had a good teacher," I replied, echoing something he used to say to me when I was younger. On our last night of camping, Dad brought up something that had been weighing on his mind. "I want you to know, Marcus, that what happened with Elena doesn't change how I feel about the idea of finding love again someday. I still believe there are good people out there, people who would genuinely care about both of us." "I know, Dad. And when you're ready to date again, I'll support you completely. But maybe next time we can take things a little slower. Get to know the person better before making any big commitments. Dad laughed, the sound echoing across the quiet lake where we had pitched our tent. Definitely slower, he agreed, and with a lot more input from my very smart son. A year later, Dad did start dating again. This time, he met someone through his hiking club, a woman named Sarah who was a widow with grown children of her own. Sarah was patient with Dad's caution and made an effort to build a genuine friendship with me before their relationship became serious. The contrast between Sarah and Elena was stark. Sarah never tried to change our family traditions or rush our timeline. She respected the memory of my mother and understood that Dad's love for her wasn't a threat to any new relationship. When Sarah and Dad got engaged after dating for 2 years, I was genuinely happy for them. Their wedding was a celebration that included both of their families, and Sarah's children became like siblings to me. Looking back, I realized that Elena's manipulation could have destroyed my relationship with Dad permanently. If she had been a little more patient, a little more subtle in her approach, she might have succeeded in driving us apart completely. But the experience also made Dad and me stronger as a family. We learned to communicate more openly about our concerns and to trust each other even when outside forces tried to come between us. Most importantly, we learned that the love between a parent and child is resilient enough to survive even sophisticated psychological manipulation, as long as both people are willing to fight for the relationship and seek help when they need it. Dad and I still take our annual camping trips, and now Sarah comes with us sometimes. We've maintained all of our important traditions while also building new ones that include her. And Elena taught us a valuable lesson about the importance of protecting the people we love from those who would exploit their vulnerabilities. But she also showed us that real love, the kind built on trust and mutual respect, is strong enough to survive any attack from those who would try to destroy it.